It's music theory. Online, let's learn some theory. Online, by watching modules. Online, with music theory. Online.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Module 10 of our Junior Music course. Today we're going to be learning about cadences, and we'll be working a little more on using Roman numerals to identify chords. The cadence is a two-chord progression that's found in specific areas or specific places in music. A chord progression is really just the natural movement of one chord to the next. Cadences have a number of really important functions which we'll be looking at. A cadence provides an end to a section of music. It's really like the end of a musical paragraph. Another way of saying it is that cadences provide a musical breath to a line of music. Normally the music will stop or slow down on very strong chords in the key. These really strong chords are built on the first degree of the scale or on the fifth degree of the scale, which means they're a 1 or a 5 chord, and sometimes on a 4 chord. That doesn't necessarily mean that every time you have a 4 or a 5 or a 1 chord progression that it's always a cadence. There is a final cadence at the end of a piece of music, and often at the end of a section of music. There are two types of final cadences, a perfect cadence and a plagal cadence. A perfect cadence is a 5-to-1 cadence, and that means it's a cadence that's built on the dominant of the key and moves to the tonic of the key. A plagal cadence is a 4-to-1 cadence. That means it's built on the fourth degree of the scale, or the subdominant, and then it moves to the tonic chord. The perfect cadence is the most common of all the cadences, and it's the one that sounds the most final. Let's go over these perfect cadences. The first one is a perfect cadence in C major, and it sounds like this. Notice underneath that we have the 5 and the 1 in Roman numerals. This is a G major chord, which is a 5 chord in C major, progressing to a C major chord, which is a 1 chord in C major. Both of these chords are in root position because the root of the chord is in the bass clef. When writing perfect cadences, it's always best to have the chords in root position. Because both of these chords are in root position, the root of the chord has been doubled in the treble clef. Our second perfect cadence is in G minor. In a minor key, always remember that the dominant chord is always major because of the raised leading note. The 1 chord in a minor key is always a minor triad, which is why we use a lowercase Roman numeral. The G minor perfect cadence sounds like this. The third perfect cadence is in the key of D major. Again, notice that both these chords are written in root position with the root doubled in the treble clef. Are you starting to get comfortable with naming the chords with Roman numerals? Here's what the perfect cadence in D major sounds like. The final perfect cadence is in F minor. Remember, the dominant chord in a minor key is always a major triad because you must raise the 7th note. The 1 chord in a minor key is always a minor chord. Again, these are in root position with the root of the chords doubled in the treble clef. Do you see how the perfect cadence is formed? The plagal cadence is the other final cadence. The plagal cadence has the subdominant chord going to the tonic chord. That means it's a 4-to-1 chord progression. While this is a final cadence, it's not as strong as the perfect cadence. It sounds similar to Amen. Let's look at these plagal cadences together. Our first plagal cadence is in the key of A flat major. This is what it sounds like. When we count up to the 4th note in A flat major, it is D flat. That means the 4 chord is a D-flat major chord. Notice that the chords in the plagal cadence are in root position. That means the root of the chord is doubled in the treble clef. Our second plagal cadence is in the key of B minor. It sounds like this. Did you notice when I played it that the 4 chord is minor? This cadence is in root position, which means the root of the chord has been doubled in the treble clef. Because the 4 chord is a minor chord, a lowercase 4 is used. Let's look at our E minor plagal cadence. Again, the 4 chord is an A minor chord and is written using a lowercase Roman numeral. As with all other examples, the chords are written in root position with the root of the chord doubled in the treble clef. Here's what this cadence sounds like. The last plagal cadence is in the key of A major. It sounds like this. Again, like all the other examples, both chords are in root position with the roots doubled in the treble clef. Let's look at these chord progressions and cadences together and see if we can discover what type of cadence we have. Let's look at example A. I'll play it for you. Some of you may be able to recognize the cadence just by hearing it. That's a wonderful skill to develop. However, we also need to be able to identify it visually as well. You may want to pause this module so you can figure out what these chords are and what type of cadence it is. Some of you may need to work through the first one with me, and that's not a problem. Cadences and chord progressions are too important to not thoroughly understand them. First, we must determine what key we're in. We have 2 sharps in the key signature, which means that we're in the key of D major or B minor. If we're in B minor, we would see A sharps, which are not in this example. Also, the last chord is a D major chord, which is the 1 chord in D major. We can add the 1 under the last chord. Now let's look at the second last chord. It's an A major chord, which in the key of D major is a 5 chord. As we know, a 5 to 1 chord progression is a perfect cadence. I think it would be helpful if we practice finding the other chords that are in this example. Before the 5 chord, we have a G major chord, GBD. In the key of D major, the G major chord is a 4 chord. The first chord in this example is a D major chord, which is the 1 chord in D major. So this first example has the chord progression 1, 4, 5, 1. These are all major chords. Let's look at the next example. Here's what it sounds like. The first step is to find the key. In this case, it's the key of G major. Also, the last chord is a 1 chord in G major, which is a major chord. Also, if it was the relative minor, which would be E minor, we would need to have a D sharp. And we don't. Let's work as we did before from the last chord. Our last chord, as I said before, is a G major chord. The notes of the chord are GBD. In the key of G major, that's a 1 chord. The chord before this is a D major chord. The D major chord has D, F sharp, and A. In the key of G major, the D major chord is a 5 chord. That means we have a perfect cadence. Let's look at the note written before the D major triad. It's a C major triad. The notes of the triad are C, E, and G. In the key of G major, this is a 4 chord. Our first chord is also a G major chord. The only difference in this chord is that the G and the bass clef is an octave higher than in the last chord. Let's see what kind of cadence we have in this measure. Let me play it for you. First, like in the previous examples, we need to discover what key we're in. Why don't you pause this module and discover the key, the chord progressions, and the type of cadence? All right, let's figure out this chord progression. First of all, it's in the key of B flat major. The last chord is a B flat major chord which has the notes B flat, D, and F. In the key of B flat major, this is a 1 chord. The chord in front of it is an E flat major chord. The E flat major chord is a 4 in the key of B flat major. The 4-to-1 chord progression is a plagal cadence. Like our other examples, the first chord is a B flat major chord, or a 1 chord. The first chord is not part of the cadence, it's called a precadential chord. Many of the previous examples also have had a precadential chord. Let's look at our last example. Again, try to figure this out before moving forward in this module. This last example is in the key of A major. The first chord and the last chord are A major chords with the notes A, C sharp, and E. The A major chord is a 1 chord in A major. In this example, the only other chord we need to look at is that middle chord, which is an E major chord. The notes of the E major chord are E, G sharp, and B. The E major chord is a 5 chord in the key of A major. The chord progression for the last example is 1, which is a precadential chord, 5-to-1. As you know, the 5-to-1 chord progression is a perfect cadence. Here's what it sounds like. For these examples, we're assuming they're at the end of a piece of music or at the end of a major section of music. Remember that when you have a 5-to-1 chord progression, it's only a perfect cadence if it's at the end of the piece of music or at the end of a phrase. Likewise, if you have a 4-to-1 chord progression, it does not necessarily mean it's always a plagal cadence. It's only a plagal cadence when it falls at the end of a piece of music or at the end of the section of music or at the end of a major phrase. Here's some more cadences for us to practice. Why don't you pause this module and try to solve these on your own, and then we'll work through them together. Here we go. Let's solve all these questions. In our first example, the key is F major. The Roman numerals are 5-to-1. This is a perfect cadence. Did you get it? Remember that the C major chord is found on the 5th degree of the F major scale. We also know that this is a major key because the relative minor would have a C sharp. Also, the F chord kind of gives this away. Because this is a 5-to-1 cadence, we know that it's a perfect cadence. Here's what it sounds like. The second example is in the key of A major. The Roman numerals are 4-to-1. That means it's a plagal cadence. As with all of our examples that we've been looking at, all of the chords are in root position. The hardest part is finding the Roman numeral. The D major triad is found on the 4th degree in the key of A major. That's why it's the 4 chord. Here's what this cadence sounds like. Here's our third example. Hopefully you notice that the B is raised to B sharp. That's the raised leading note in the key of C sharp minor. The Roman numerals for this example are 5-to-1, but it's a lowercase 1, and it's a perfect cadence. Remember, the dominant or 5 in a minor key is always a major chord. As you get working more and more with cadences, that raised leading note will really jump out at you and help you with naming keys and with identifying cadences. Also, the 1 chord in a minor key is always a minor chord. When I play this for you, you'll notice the first chord is major and the second chord is minor. Could you hear the difference between the major and minor chords? In this last example, we're in the key of G minor. This is a little more difficult to see because there's no F sharp that has been raised in these two chords. That's because there is no F in the chord. You can still find the key signature relatively easily because if you try to make this work in the key of B flat major, you will not be able to come up with a cadence because the chord numbers just won't make any sense and will seem really weird. If you assume that you're in the key of B flat major, you would have a 2 to 6 chord progression, which as a cadence just doesn't exist. When you solve this in G minor, it makes perfect sense. In G minor, you would have a 4 to 1 chord progression. Notice that the 4 chord is a C minor chord. In minor keys, the 4 chord is always a minor chord and the 1 chord is always a minor chord, which is a G minor chord. The 4 to 1 cadence is always a plagal cadence. When I play this, you'll hear that both chords are minor chords. Could you hear the difference? So let's just review cadences. The perfect cadence is always 5 to 1. In a major key, the 5 and the 1 chords are major. In a minor key, the 5 is always a major chord because of the raised leading note, and the 1 chord is always minor. It's so important to remember to raise the leading note of the dominant chord in a minor key. That will always make the dominant chord major in minor keys. The plagal cadence is always 4 to 1. In a major key, both the 4 and the 1 are major chords. In a minor key, both the 4 and the 1 are minor chords. We didn't do this, however, when you mark cadences in your music, it's best to use a bracket. You'll see this on your homework assignment this week. Plagal and perfect cadences always sound finished because they end on the tonic or on the 1 chord. Did you find this module interesting? I always think it's interesting when you're able to start working with chords. You'll find it really helps your sense of tonality and understanding your own music that you're playing when you start to see how chords function in relationship to the keys that they're in. Your assignments will help you understand this even better, and as you know, I'm here to help you every step of the way. I look forward to seeing everyone in Theory Club this week. Have a super duper week. Bye now.
It's music theory. Online, let's learn some theory. Online, by watching modules. Online, with music theory. Online.